Welcome to another episode of Home Sweet Home. My name is Rod McCall.
And I'm Scott Nichols.
I always find it interesting how little things in life can take your mind in weird and odd directions.
Oh boy, this sounds interesting.
Well, no, I mean, okay, something happens or a thought pops in your head and one thought leads to another thought, which leads to a memory or recollection. And the next thing you know, you're like a mile away from where you started from.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one that has those kinds of, weird direction habit, thought patterns. I mean, I don't know how to explain that, but I'm just always weird thoughts or something will happen and I'll just lead me down a path and it's kind of like, dang.
I mean, I think that's what social media does to everybody every day.
You think so?
I mean, when I get on social media, I end up going down some weird rabbit hole of, reels and things and stuff that I'm scrolling past. That's like, what am I even doing?
Okay.
Right?
Well, that's true.
Sometimes it leads me to a memory, right? Because sometimes they Facebook or the other socials will pop up a memory.
Oh, that's true. They do. They send you the pictures or who knows, but you're right. They
Random
do.
thoughts, right?
Random
Deep
thoughts.
Thoughts by Jack Handy.
Yeah. I was thinking exactly that. Well, what got me thinking the most recently was, again, I won't go into the details of how I got here, but I got thinking about the impact that parenting has on family relationships.
Okay.
And I was thinking first of mine, with Sherry and I now.
Sure.
Then with Eric's mother and I.
Yeah.
And then, of course, with my siblings, as they were with their kids. And then, of course, going all the way back to the dynamics with growing up with my parents and I and my sisters and the like. And it just got me thinking of how sometimes the way you can parent can influence the happy home or the less than happy home.
Oh, sure.
And so since you got 3 kids,
I do.
I would imagine you got all kinds of stories of how well or times of when it didn't go so well.
Well, I mean, I think there's, looking back, there's definitely times where I probably didn't do such a great job. I don't know. I guess I kind of let my kids judge that now, right?
Okay. All right.
I don't know what they're saying, to other people, but, my daughter's raising a son and she's doing it largely in the same way that we did, with raising our kids. So I feel like there's probably a few things that we did right.
Well, and yes. And I guess where I was thinking is I never heard my parents argue in front of us.
Sure.
On a parenting dispute. I know a lot of times they would say, well, let us think about it. Let us talk about it together and we'll get back with you.
Sure.
My dad would always say, if you need an answer right now, the answer is no.
Right.
But if you let me have time to think about it, I might change my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of like, okay, take your time because
yeah.
we definitely don't want to know.
But I need to know by 8 o'clock.
Well, yeah. But yet I know that there were many occasions where Eric's mom and I would disagree.
Sure.
And even though while we were dating and when we were first married and before Eric came around, we had mapped out, well, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to handle these situations. But then when the situations came up, well, they didn't go as planned.
Yeah.
And now with Sherry and I, having stepkids, that creates a whole totally different dynamic. And so sometimes even now it has led to some difficult times in our house.
Well, I think blended families like that brings in a whole new dynamic, right? Because, you may have each been raising children before you came together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you have to reconcile your styles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you might have kind of these ideas about, well, that's my kid. Like I want to raise them this way, despite how you think you want to raise your kids. And so that brings in a new dynamic. I think for my wife and I mean, we've been married for, we're in our 3rd year of marriage. Yeah, that's right. 33rd year. And, so, before we got married, we, did some marriage counseling, or premarital counseling, I should say.
Right.
And, in that counseling, we talked about what kind of ideas do we have about raising kids? You kind of try to flesh that stuff out ahead of time.
Yeah.
As much as possible. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean we always agreed in the moment, but I think there's some things that we employed as we went through parenting that are beneficial. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going, because Eric's mom and I, we did this pre-marriage counseling, and that was one of the things that came up. But one of the things that I noticed is, the impact of grandparents on parenting, and how a lot of times her parents, who were very involved and very present in our marriage, in the things that they would say or do or allow or not allow, which didn't always jive with what we would allow or do at home. And so that would create some interesting conversations. And so anyway, it got me, like I said, I was just thinking about, this is a very common issue. And so was looking around and, got some information from the Center for Parenting Education. .org. And so they provided some interesting stuff, and I thought, maybe we could kind of explore and look at that. Because, we've talked a little bit about parenting styles, and that's part of what they kind of were talking about, that you've got your different, parenting styles, whether you're permissive, aggressive, or assertive, and how each one of those parenting styles can lead to, conflict resolution or worse, conflict. And so anyway, I figured we might kind of explore and kind of see where that takes us.
I think that's good. So, I mean, I can start off on this, I think, because we have, as parents, my wife and I have made it a really big effort, right, not to undermine each other.
Okay.
Particularly in front of the kids.
Yes.
And so if one is saying something, we're going to back them up. That doesn't mean we won't disagree behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're just not going to fight about it in front of the kids. We're going to have that united front. And, because I think that as soon as you have some kind of public disagreement, right, in front of those kids, they're going to learn sides. And they're going to play off of that. And so, allowing them to kind of look around, when I want this, I'm going to go here. Right? Because I know that dad's not going to back, not going to back that up, or, but mom will do it, or dad, we go to dad for these things, because, he's going to, follow through on it. And, it's going to make mom mad, but so what? So, I think you have a united front, and then you have those discussions on the backside. I think the more you have those discussions on the backside, the less of conflict you're going to have in the moment, right? Like your united front is truly going to be united and not, just having to back them for the moment.
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the biggest things that contributed to my divorce with Eric's mom is I would say one thing and she would override it.
Right.
And it's kind of like, wait a minute. We had talked a long time ago that we would not do this. So why are you continuously doing this?
Right.
And it led to a wide variety of unhappy conversations in our house. And so, because you're right, it did create animosity. I mean, some things we did agree on.
I remember, just a couple of weeks ago, my oldest daughter had said, I think you guys are probably still together because, when I was in like seventh grade, when she was in seventh grade, she made us promise we weren't going to get a divorce. Right. And I said, well, I mean, you may think that, but we promised each other we weren't going to do that before we even got married. So, but yes, if you want to feel like that was you, then great, but she, she had witnessed basically an argument, and we didn't have very many of them in front of our kids. And so it was actually like a kind of a devastating moment for her. Like all her friends had divorced parents. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wait a minute. Is this what leads to that? Are you going to get a divorce? And so, regardless of what your relationship is, that's kind of not in front of the kids.
Sure.
Having that united front in front of the kids is a good, healthy thing for them.
Well, even when mom and dad do get divorced, one of the best things that we can do for our children is to co-parent together, to not undermine. And, hey, look, this is what we do at dad's house, and this is what we do at mom's house. And you support each other.
Yeah.
But you're right. You have those, when you can have that united front, well, then the kids better develop those boundaries, coping skills. I mean, across the board, they're learning much better, long-term healthy, how shall we say this, skills, rather than learning the manipulative, negative components.
And I don't want to suggest that you hide everything, right? Like,
yeah.
But where it concerns the kids and how you're going to discipline or those kinds of things, like it should be united. I mean, they may know that you have other struggles, but not handling them in a knockdown, drag out fight will help. Them realize that, well, life is hard, but we handle it, like adults.
And yes, you're right. Everything, again, I go back to my parents, and they did a lot of things that I saw as the right way.
Yeah.
And in a lot of the stuff that I've learned over the years through divorce and all that, I keep going back to the things that they did. And I applaud them. And again, to me, they were a role model. They would always talk about things together away from us kids.
Yeah.
And then they would come back and we would have a family meeting, or they would just, if it was a discipline issue, they would, talk to, me. In this case, we'll talk about me because that's the one I have the best information on. But they would come into the bedroom and they would say, okay, this is what you did. This is why we don't like it. This is what you should, could have done differently.
Sure.
Sometimes they would have us explore, well, what could you have done differently? And if this comes up again, what do you think you might do differently? And okay, well, here's the punishment that you're going to get. And it worked out pretty good so that you could learn that, okay, it's okay to make mistakes.
And those are great reasoning skills, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can reason through the problem that way.
But anyway, I guess I don't want to go down the discipline side, but the idea that they would talk. And we would have family meetings, and they would, do those kinds of things. And, even if it was a difficult topic, it would be, there was once, they were going to move. And I mean, we were, crying out loud. I was in elementary school, and they were talking about the idea that we would move to another county. And it was kind of like, I don't want to move. Yeah. But we had a family conversation about that.
Wow. I would have moved. No questions asked.
Oh, I liked my house, my neighborhood.
Yeah. And I think that's it. So, number one was don't undermine or correct, the other parent in front of the children. That number two there, I think we're getting to that, right? Like, don't avoid difficult conversation. And I think that this is more about, there's, you need to have difficult conversations with your kids as they grow up, right? Like you don't want to sit down with a 6-year-old and have an extremely difficult conversation.
Yeah, okay.
Right. But, if they're 13, 14 years old, it's probably time to, start bringing them in on some of the harder conversations. But, as far as parents, right, adults, like you can't avoid the hard things, right? So you, especially, I'm guessing like in a blended family, like you can't just be like, nope, that's how I'm handling my kid. You handle your kid your way. Like we're not going to talk about it. That's a difficult conversation that you need to have. And, I understand that sometimes there might be a third person in there, right? Because there's another parent.
Sure.
That has their interest in it too. So.
Well, because when we parent, it's not just us. All right, it's not you. It's not mom and dad. But again, if you're in a blended family, well, then you've got the co-parents. You got the the bonus mom or the bonus dad. You've got your teachers at school. You got your coaches if they're on a team. Other adults that have a concerned interest in the child, and so having a collaborative team to the best of your ability. Because I know that my parents always said, well, hey, if you get in trouble at school, you're going to get trouble at home because we back the teacher.
But the more that you ignore and avoid those conversations, the bigger the rift gets between the adults in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And the harder it is to then do that first thing, right,
mm-hmm.
of backing the other parent, right, rather than undermine.
Well, and part of that would also be avoiding to act that impulsiveness. That you did this, oh my gosh, and you react based on that information without taking the opportunity to kind of process it, digest it, and again, talk to, the other parent and figure out, okay, and maybe you're overreacting or maybe they're overreacting and you can kind of talk about, okay, well, why do you feel that way? Okay, well, how big of a issue is this? And work on, a solution beforehand. So that then again, you can have that conversation with the child about this is why we don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I think that, but again, it's kind of hard. I think a lot of times when you see a little, when a kid is 3 years old and, you tell them don't run out in the street and they run out in the street anyway, and you bring them back, you yell at them, you smack them on the butt. Well, okay. Are you overreacting? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's not an opportunity to, you can't have a sit down conversation with, like you were saying, with a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old.
Sure.
But be careful of the overreacting. Yeah. Is that what I kind of gather from what you're suggesting?
Yeah. I mean, I think that fits. You want to approach it, in a positive way and try to meet the kid where they're at. But you don't want to avoid the conversation. You have to, if a kid's running out in the street and they're 2 years old, like you have to have that conversation about safety.
Mm-hmm.
But it might be a different conversation if the kid's 13 and still doing it.
Well,
right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's just, you have to be mindful of, where your child is developmentally and go for that. But, keeping the difficult conversations behind the scenes between the parents, right? Like if I'm going to disagree with my wife about how to discipline the child, right? Like I'm not going to do that in front of them. I'm going to do that behind the scenes. And I'm going to say, next time I think we should, handle it this way. This is why, right? Let's have that conversation. I think you also have to, focus on the positive strengths of your partner, right? Like don't focus on their weaknesses, focus on their strengths.
Yes.
And, let them know, oh, I really liked how you handled this, this particular situation. Maybe in the future, we can have you handle more of those because you're better at it. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to back you up.
Mm-hmm.
And, whatever my strengths are, I might handle those things.
Well, and I think that's,
it's a team effort.
There you go. Yes, it's parenting is tough because the kids do play you against one another, and what works for one child in one situation doesn't always work for the next child. I've gotten a full dose of that with Sherry's kids and how the older one, you would deal with them and their issues. You try that on the other one, and wow.
Yeah.
Sherry would say on the oldest one, timeout would work, but on the other one, it would absolutely not. They would yell, they would scream, they would throw temper tantrums. Timeouts just did not work.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, just kind of interesting too. Again, that communication, I think if I hear correctly, is a key component for parents to be able to successfully raise your children.
Yeah. What team is there that's not communicating?
Mm-hmm.
That you can still call a team.
No I in team.
Right. You can't, if you're not working together, you're not a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to work together, you have to communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a united front. You have to communicate effectively. You have to, play on each other's strengths, so that you can, present that front. I think that, and this is probably big in blended families, but it's also, a thing in a, like my wife and I would have dealt with this a lot. You have to establish clear boundaries.
Amen.
And rules, right? There has to be, you don't have to be like, Byzantine with it. Right?
Yes.
I mean, you still have a relationship with the kid and you still have to kind of, but ultimately you have to have clear agreed upon guidelines and boundaries for raising the child.
Yes.
And then you have to have clear rules for the child themselves, right? I mean, whether it's bedtime, when you do your homework, how often you can watch TV. I mean, my daughter's really good with like that you can only play so much video games, right? Like hours. You're going to read this much time a day. Those kinds of things, so that there's activities that they like and activities that maybe they have to do, right? Like chores.
Sure.
So for this, half hour, you're going to sweep the floor and take out the trash. I mean, that's, and that way there's scheduling, there's responsibility, there's guidelines to it. However you do that.
Sure.
There needs to be some responsibility learned.
Yes. And I mean, it's easy to armchair quarterback, especially with other people's kids, and say, hey, well, this is what you should do. This is what don't do this, but please, you should do this. Well, it kind of goes, yes, boundaries, but again, what works for one kid in one family doesn't work necessarily for another kid in another family. And I have my sisters, some of which who listen to our podcast, I can remember them telling me, don't tell me how to raise my kid. I'm going.
Yeah, and I wouldn't presume to do that.
Well, sadly, I would. And
which is why you heard that.
Well, yeah. Yeah. But a part of me was going, but here's why I think you should do that. But I wasn't always good at communicating the why. But you're right on setting boundaries, being firm with those boundaries, because kids do best with boundaries.
I can only speak to my own experience, right? What I did to raise kids, what I chose to do to raise my kids that I felt was different from maybe how I was raised. The experience I went through being in a divorced household and remarriage, those kinds of things that's my experience, right? So I draw off my experience to say, this is what worked for me. I mean, if it works for you, great. Right. Like, I think that there's some, we're reading some articles here that are psychology based and parenting based that suggest that these things do work. I don't have, I wasn't in some kind of empirical study.
No, neither
to figure
was I.
that out. But, I just have seen things that worked for me and things that didn't. What works for you, you need to find it.
Well, and I think that we've worked with enough kids and enough families that we can say while it may not be an empirical scientific study, the suggestions and ideas that are recommended by, again, the parenting, the partners in the Center for Parenting Education.org, and others, or, some of the other stuff we looked at before we came up with today's episode, well, it resonates because we've seen it. And when parents can do these things, well, then we see the children be able to be a little more resilient, be able to move forward much better when this isn't done at home. When we try, we then have a different type of child that we see and engage with that is a little more challenging. And so it makes sense that here we go. And
I think that's important to recognize too, that as we see other parents, right, we shouldn't be thinking, well, you should do it my way.
Oh, yes.
I don't know what your way is. And I also don't know what your situation is.
True.
And I have to understand that not everybody's situation is the same. And people have different challenges. And
True.
Those myriad of different challenges can present themselves many, many different issues. So it's a complex thing, right? That's why there's no book that's on parenting where it's okay, everybody just buy this book. And that's the one that tells you how to do it. That's the manual on your kid. It doesn't work that way. Everybody's different.
That is correct. And so I agree with you that there's no one perfect fit, but there are, again, the stuff that we're suggesting does work pretty darn well.
Sure.
When done in concert with other activities.
Professional studies suggest there's best practices, right?
Sure.
And there's lots of different strategies within that you can try.
Right.
Some will work for you, some may not.
Well, and that's where, again, this coming up, I am a firm believer in boundaries and rules, being firm and consistent, but yet at the same time, being able to be flexible, because not everything, this is a slightly different situation. So let's take that into consideration.
Yeah.
Which ties into one of the things that Sherry has always said, pick your battles. And there was one time I looked at her and I go, I hear what you're saying, but are you going to pick any battles? Are you going to tell them no on anything? And
hopefully you didn't ask her that in front of the kids.
No.
Right.
But it turned out she was more right than I was in the long term and how she handled the situation. But
Sure.
You can't make mountains out of every issue.
No.
And
If you're going to die on every hill, then you're going to be, stressing yourself out every single day.
Sure. And it's hard to know what it is. And again, kid is going to be a determining factor, as every child is a little different. Age is going to play a factor. There's a lot that goes into that. But when you choose wisely, it helps with those conflicts between you and your spouse.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, as I was interpreting their suggestion, I just keep remembering, Sherry going, that's just not a fight I want to have.
Yeah.
And so because I'm going, but this is the way we should do this. But again, that was my approach based on my experience. And as a bonus dad, I was a Johnny-come-lately to their family way of doing things.
Yeah. I think this comes back to the agreement thing, right? Like you need to have some agreement on rules and boundaries. And the rules and boundaries that you agree on are the things that you're going to, enforce. Outside of that, you have to recognize that kids have, they're developing their own personalities.
Yeah.
And they might be different from yours. And that might create minor annoyances that you really don't have to fight, right? You can almost celebrate some of their, those things as being part of their personality, right? Like if they're like always telling jokes because that's their personality and it's just annoying the crap out of you, don't fight about it, celebrate the fact that they have a sense of humor and they're happy, right? I mean,
they might be the next Jeff Dunham or
who knows, right? Nate Bargatze.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, you just don't know where that's going to take them. And, kids are complex as far as, they're growing up. They're learning who they are. They're trying new things. And you can't jump on everything because then they'll be too afraid to try anything.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I am interpreting this, choosing your battles wisely, is just exactly that.
Yeah.
Don't make them to be mini me's or make them just like you. But, no, you're right. And
I mean, I think safety is paramount.
Yeah.
And you probably want to, battle on safety.
Yeah.
They need to be safe. But I had, my kids did some things that were probably unsafe and I didn't scold them for it. They were in a place of safety, right? Where they were at somebody's house that I knew and they were safe. And, maybe they weren't doing something that I would have liked them to do.
But then again, so did we when we were growing up.
Right. I mean, there was just no cameras when we were growing up. It didn't go on social media. Right.
Thank God.
I mean, the kids are no different now than they were when we were growing up or they were, in the 40s or in the 19th century. I mean,
sure.
It's just kids are kids, right? And they do crazy things. And part of that is figuring out who they are and where the boundaries are. I mean, so sometimes you've got to enforce the boundary and other times you got to just remind them that there was a boundary.
Well,
and you probably crossed it and you shouldn't do that.
Sure.
But we don't have to have a fight about it.
Well, and to piggyback on that, to go, when you mentioned this a little bit ago, as the kids get older, adjusting over time what you're going to prioritize because safety for a 5-year-old will not be the same example as a safety for a 10, 11-year-old.
Exactly.
Versus 16, 17-year-old. And so, you know, making those adjustments. And that can help a lot. And, you know, with the boundaries of setting expectations. Here's your boundaries. Go and have fun, but stay within, you know, the confines. For me, I mean, it was a good example when we were growing up riding our bikes. Well, you could ride your bike up to this neighbor's house and down to that neighbor's house.
Right.
And stay within those number of houses. And then as we got older, well, okay, stay on just our street. And then a little bit older, well, okay, stay within so many blocks. And
right.
So again, adjusting over time.
Yeah, I think that's important. And, you know, honestly, the best time is when they're adults, which is what I have now, right? And parenting doesn't end. It just changes.
Yes,
it does.
It's
just a change over time. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Well, Jessica just turned 29 and Evan's 25, 26. So, I mean, yeah. And it's kind of fun because you can do different things with them.
Yeah, I've got 3, and by the end of the year, only one of them is going to be under 30.
Oh, good Lord.
You know, I'm getting up there, but you know, it's a great time. I think that one of the things that my wife and I did was, and you know, to some extent we got picked on by some people for it. But we nurtured our own relationship. And I think that's really important. Like aside from the kid issue.
Okay.
Right. Take some time to be with each other, have date nights, go out, do things. And don't be like, oh, so it's been 6 months. Let's do something. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Do it once a month. Do it once every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Find a good, solid babysitter if they're young, and you know, make sure that you take the time for yourself. Because if you don't, you're not partners anymore.
You're yes. In that case, you are 2 jail wardens or 2 jailers at the prison, and it's us against. You know, I with you, and I've shared this. You know, before, relationships are like a bank account.
Yeah.
And you got to make more deposits than you do withdrawals. And co-parenting, you're making a lot of withdrawals. So I like that. That's a really good suggestion.
And I think that's valid in any relationship, right? Like my wife and I, when, you know, we got together, it wasn't, you know, it was before we had kids. If you're in a blended situation, you probably didn't choose that person because of their kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that might have been a factor in there, but you chose the person, not
the children.
Like, oh,
or their family.
I love your kids. Can I get married to you? Yeah. Right? Like that's probably not the case. I hope.
No.
Right. So, but that adult relationship between those parents is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not fostering that, then you're going to struggle with all the rest of it.
Yeah, because that played, I think, a big challenge for Eric's mom and I. We did not do that.
Yeah.
And the constant disagreements over child rearing just grew more and more and more because we never took the time to invest in ourselves and just go out to the movies or, you know, and if we take that quality time to disengage from over here to engage directly with ourselves and can, you know, keep nurturing that relationship. So no, parenting is tough and it can lead to a lot of challenges, a lot of conflicts. But I think if you work together and always remember we're a team, I think you can get through it just fine.
I think so. Anyway, I think that's all the time we have. So
okay,
I'm gonna have to cut it off there. I could probably go for another hour on this.
I think so too.
We won't wear everybody's ears out. So.
All right. Well, then, very good. Well, thanks. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you indulging me as we went down the rabbit hole.
All right.
So, well, until next time, I'm Rod.
I'm Scott.
See ya.
Bye-bye.